We've been learning about all of the ways in which social interaction and the social presence of others changes our world, changes our lives. And today I'm going to talk about how the social brain affects human learning. And not just ordinary learning, but learning of language. And for those of you who have studied the history of theories about the evolution and acquisition of language in humans, you know that it's typically considered a separate entity, that language learning and its evolution has nothing to do with general cognition, has nothing to do with general social operation. It's been considered by the greatest theorists, Chomsky, Fodor, to be more isolated, encapsulated, a module all onto its own. But when you really look at the acquisition of language in individual babies and infants as a group, what you learn is that language should be embedded in the mind of the child and the brain of humans more generally, that it relies on cognitive abilities and it relies on social abilities. And today I want to focus my energy and the work that I've done in early language learning on the social impacts. So the statement that is the title of this talk, "The Social Brain Gates Language Learning," to you doesn't seem like heresy, but to many individuals in the field, this is a very surprising and bold statement that the social brain gates language learning. So I want to back that up with some research. And the implications of the social brain being so important to language learning and perhaps to learning in general has many implications for children with disabilities, particularly autism, but also children who are separated from other social input. So children in the United States who are in foster care. The state removes children from families in which they are abused and neglected. And we're beginning to look at the effects on the brain of that neglect and on language many years after they've been taken out of that situation. And the effects are profound. So many theorists didn't really look at young babies to understand behaviorally and from the standpoint of the brain, how is language developing? We've been doing behavioral work for 30 years, and now we're doing a lot of, so that I have to keep adjusting there's no audio on this track, but yeah, it's okay. Anyway, what we've added in the last 10 years is information from MEG on the function of the brain. We can actually create a movie now. As the baby is listening to speech, we can play a movie that shows activity in the brain. And so the addition of brain function gives us information we couldn't have from behavior alone. Also, the structural studies we can do now with structural MRI to look at the long-range white matter pathways and the development of connectivity that supports language. And so that's adding a great deal to theory. And we've come to the place, I will only mention them briefly, but we are now able, we understand enough to create interventions for parents and for teachers that encourage bilingual language learning. Not that you need it here in Israel, but in the United States and in many other countries. The idea that bilingualism is good for the brain, it's good for executive function. It doesn't confuse infants. That in the United States is still not well understood. So we're creating language interventions and testing them in Madrid, Spain, in the early education centers and showing how successful it is. And also providing feedback to parents about their language input to children and their social context and how much it supports research. So let's start with a fundamental premise about language, that no one disagrees with this curve. This was published, it's kind of a cartoon in a way, it's not real data, but it compiles data across many, many studies across languages. That if you look at the age constraints on the acquisition of a second language, you see a dramatic shift from early development to later development. So in the early period, the first 7 years of life, kids are geniuses at simply acquiring a second language with total ease. and being able to be facile in that language. But after the age of 7, every 2 years you see a decline in the ability, the facility to learn a second language. And after puberty, and we think puberty is an important benchmark, it changes drastically, much, much harder. I think we don't use the same brain mechanisms to learn a language past puberty that we learned earlier. Doesn't mean it's impossible, it means it's difficult. And within this broad curve, there are individual sensitive periods for aspects of language. So the earliest one is baby's ability to recognize which sounds are used in my particular language. Babies have to acquire a knowledge of which are the sounds that are going to alter word meaning in their language, and each language has an individual set of sounds that are used. Later, around 18 to 24 months, the acquisition of words happens rapidly, 10 per day. Children are acquiring the names for things. And right around the age of 3, there is a sensitive period for the acquisition of grammar. So this broad curve is separated by individual periods that are very interesting. And for me, that first period, that first acquisition of sounds, acquired in the first year of life, before you're hearing baby's first words, which happens at about 12 months, they have mastered the sound system of the language. And I want to show you what are they using, what data are they using to master the sound system of language before they acquire first words. So let's talk a little bit about speech, the consonants and vowels that make up words. Here we have at the top diagrams of the mouth, and on the left you see ah. This is phonetic transcription, ah, a sound across all languages. And on the right, the structure of your tongue movement when you're producing ah. So ah and ah, and below you see the physics of the situation. Acoustic analysis shows very small differences in the formant frequencies. Formant frequencies of resonance in the vocal tract. As you move your tongue and mouth, as I'm doing right now, these are dancing all over the place. If I say ah, this is the F2 that distinguishes it from ah, very slight differences. So, before we knew that babies could discriminate these sounds, we argued that it might take years for them to get it right. These are very small differences in frequency and amplitude and duration. But it turns out that infants are so good at the sound differences for language that they, at birth, can discriminate all the sound contrasts used in all the languages of the world. 600 languages, many, many sound contrasts, babies can hear them all. How do we know that? I created a behavioral technique that I used in laboratories across the world, 8 laboratories in 8 different countries, and had babies sit on a parent's lap and listen to a sound coming from a loudspeaker, like ah, ah, ah. The baby's job is to watch dancing toys and listen for a sound change. And when the sound changes from ah to anything else, like E or any other vowel, the baby's got 3 seconds to turn their head to see a dancing toy in a box. Here's what it looks like. Oh, we're now going to listen to... Sorry. Sorry. I'm trying to explain why computers have had so much trouble understanding speech, because all of the people in this room have different sized vocal tracts, and when you compare men, women, and children, the differences in their vocal tracts has made it impossible for computers to recognize speech. It's now doing it on the basis of words. No computer in the world, not Bill Gates, no one, can take what a baby does naturally in the first year of life, listen to language, and derive the sound structure. And here's the reason why. You heard all of these different people saying ah, here's the same set of people saying ah. You know that it's ah and ah, but computers Okay, sound is wonderful because you can hear sort of the size of the individual, and you can hear whether they're male or female, you can tell whether they're smiling or not. Sound, I will be telling you, sound is another way. Touch is one way and smell is another way, and there are various ways that parents connect with their children. Sound and the language that we use and what it conveys about the voice is very, very important. Here's how I tested across the nations of the world what differences babies could hear early in development. So here's a little movie.
Can a baby as young as 6 months old hear the difference between 2 vowels? This baby is trained to look for the toy when the sound changes. She's being distracted, so she'll turn only when she hears the difference in sounds. The key question, will she turn before the toy lights up?
Okay, she's very smart and she knows it. So all over the world, you can demonstrate that babies this is a 6-month-old. At 6 months of age, all babies all over every country, no matter what sound contrast you use, produce this head turn. The parents sitting behind the babies with their headphones, so they can't influence the task, cannot hear the differences if they have not been exposed in the first 7 years of life to that language. So the babies are the geniuses. They're the citizens of the world. They can hear all the differences. The parents are language-bound listeners. They can hear only those contrasts in the languages to which they were exposed early in life. So the question we had first was, when do they change? When does this citizen of the world turn into a language-bound listener? And they do that before their first birthday. So by 12 months of age, when words are acquired, infants already know which are the sound contrasts that are critical to the language. I did this study in many, many different countries. This is the result we see everywhere. This particular study was done in Tokyo and in Seattle. We're using ra and la, so the babies are hearing ra, 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 and then when they hear la, they have to turn their heads. And as you see, at 6 to 8 months, the babies are equivalent. Everyone is performing above chance, which is 50%. There are control trials where we don't change the sound and we watch for head turns. They're at about 65%. And then 2 months later, and by 10 months, the American infants are much better on the RL, significant increase, and the Japanese kids have a significant decline. Each of those babies in those countries are doing exactly what they have to do to acquire words. The Japanese baby needs to ignore this difference between R and L to acquire Japanese well, and the American baby has to concentrate on that difference. All over the world, babies are making this change between 6 and 12 months. They are universal citizens of the world, and then they begin to become the language-bound listener, right? This is the first evidence of language learning. So, as a scientist, we ask, what are they doing? How are they doing it? You would never know if you've raised a child or you have a grandchild that between this period of 8 to 10 months, a miracle is happening in their brains. What are they using? What are they doing this with? Chomsky used to say there's the poverty of the stimulus. The stimulus isn't adequate for kids to learn. It's not true. We will show what the babies are using to learn. Now, whether you do this test behaviorally or you do it neurally, so about 15 years ago, I started using event-related potentials, neuroscan cap. You see the baby wearing the cap, same kind of stimulus, ra, 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 ra changing to la, or ba, 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 ba changing to pa. And you see the standard stimulus, the one repeating with the blue curve, and you see the deviant, the new stimulus. As soon as the new stimulus comes on, about 200 to 300, that window, 200 to 400, you see this negativity. And this negativity, the MMN, Natnan named it the MMN, mismatch negativity, is shown by all adults for all of the sound contrasts in their language, but not for other languages. And here we see the exact change. At 6 months, they're showing this MMN for all of the sound contrasts across languages. By 11 months, only for the ones that they've been exposed to. So we know whether it's neural measurement or behavioral measurement, this change is happening. We've also shown that this change is really important. This ability to show the increase for native sounds and the decrease for foreign sounds predicts language development to 30 months. All aspects of it, mean length of utterance, word acquisition, sentence complexity, and I show you here just the curve for the word acquisition. On the left, I'm showing the native predictor. So if you use the native contrast and you divide kids into the best, so look at the native predictor, the red curve is the best kids, the top half of the distribution. The blue dotted curve is the lower half of the distribution. The better kids are at native sound discrimination at 7.5 months, so that's early, they're fast, the faster their language is going to grow, the more words they will have. The non-native predictor is also predicting significantly future language, but it predicts slower language development. So kids who are still good at the non-native Sound contrast, when they're not exposed to it, meaning they haven't learned that transition, they're not paying exclusive attention to the stuff that their parents, the sounds their parents are producing, they will acquire language more slowly. So this change, this attending to the right stuff, is extremely important in the early period. We've now shown that that ability between 6 and 12 months to show that change predicts language acquisition out to 5 years and reading readiness at age 5. So this is important stuff that babies are doing in that second half of the first year. So again, what are they doing? What mechanisms are they using? What kind of learning? So I'll describe two kinds. One is statistical, and the second one is different, social. And what I'll end up saying is that babies are taking statistics as they listen to us talk. Before they understand a single word, they are paying attention to the patterns of sound. Which sounds are occurring and how frequent are they? Their brains focus on the most frequent sounds they hear us produce, in the absence of any understanding of language or words. So they're statistical generators. They have a computational brain. But this computational skill for the young babies only is put to work in a social context. That's the new discovery. The computational brain is constrained by a social context. How convenient that babies take their statistics with regard to language only in the presence of a human being. But that's what the research is showing. So first, let me demonstrate this statistical business. What does it mean to say the babies are taking statistics? I'm going to play for you an English-speaking mother producing what's called, it used to be called motherese, now it's called parentese, because all parents do it, older siblings do it. It's this very melodic sounding speech that turns out to be very good for language. And then I'll have you listen to a Japanese mother producing the same thing and illustrate this statistical component.
I love your big blue eyes. So pretty and nice. うわー、大きな茶色いお目目。そして綺麗な黒い髪。
Okay, so babies love this. This signal. They will choose motherese or parentese over standard speech, which is what I'm producing. Given a choice in the laboratory, no matter what language it is, they will turn on over and over and over this parentese signal. So this parentese signal is very attractive to babies. It has this high frequency. You move the pitch of your voice up an octave when you address a baby. That's a big shift. Males, females, grandparents, even younger siblings, raise the pitch, slow the speech, and give the baby time to take turns and vocalize back to you. So what you see at the bottom is what their brains are doing. The distributional statistics in cartoon form of the English mom, lots of R's, lots of L's, but not that intermediate Japanese sound. And on the right, you see the Japanese mother's, the distribution of her sounds, hardly any R's and L's, but that intermediate sound. So when I say babies are taking statistics, they're literally affected by the frequency with which the sounds occur. In the laboratory, you can change a baby's perception in 2 minutes at this phase by playing Japanese or English. The baby brain is very sensitive to the statistics that they're hearing. And this is true not only for auditory stimuli, true for visual, it's been done broadly. It affects perception. So babies are listening as we talk to them, and they're learning powerfully through these mechanisms. And I want to illustrate that learning starts even in the womb. Okay, so we did studies in Stockholm and the United States in the newborn nurseries within the first 24 hours after birth. And the last 10 weeks of pregnancy, the mother's voice is powerfully transmitted through bone conduction to the fetus. And so mother's voice is recognized at birth and her language that she spoke. And we just recently discovered that even the sounds that she produces. So here's a baby listening. Every time the baby sucks, a computerized sound will present. Watch this baby. Let's see if we can get this movie to go. No, we can't. All right, well, skip it. What we see is that the baby is turning on sounds pretty rapidly, looking around for the source of the sound. And what babies in each of the two countries, Stockholm and Seattle, demonstrated is that at that newborn phase, they had been listening in Stockholm to the Swedish vowels of their mother. They preferred to listen to the English vowels. In America, the babies had gotten used to the English vowels. They preferred to listen to the Swedish vowels. What it demonstrates is that babies are listening, that they're remembering, and that they like novelty at that age. 6 months later, oh, there it goes. All right, it's malfunctioning. Sorry. So 6 months later, if you present babies in Stockholm and in the United States with the red vowels, those are E vowels and variants by different people. The blue ones are Swedish vowels. What we see by 6 months is that infants in both countries have become very able to categorize the vowels, hear them as similar. Despite all these variations that I've been talking about, babies can solve a problem that computers can't. You see at the top panel, the American infants are categorizing in red, recognizing all the vowels in those circles in red as the same, but not being able to do that for the Swedish vowels. On the Swedish babies at the bottom, the blue line is higher. There, the Swedish babies are recognizing all the variations as belonging to the same category when they hear Swedish vowels, but not American vowels. So again, by 6 months, babies are transformed. Their brains are transformed by the statistics of the language that's coming in. So we asked the question, at 9 months during the sensitive period, what happens if you give a baby a brand new language for the first time? What if you give an American baby Mandarin? Can they take statistics on Mandarin at 9 months of age? Why does it take till 9 months for the babies to change? Maybe they're building up statistical distributions. We didn't know. So try it at the sensitive period to see if they change. So we exposed babies in Seattle to Mandarin for the first time. And I'm showing you here what we had learned by going to Taiwan. So here you see the Taiwanese babies, when they listen to a contrast in Chinese that is not in American English, it's the Taiwanese babies getting better, the American babies in Seattle getting worse, exactly that same pattern we saw in the Japanese and American study. But here we see the American babies getting better. So what we did was expose our Seattle babies to 12 sessions of Mandarin. I had 6 doctoral students, postdocs at the time, whose native language was Mandarin. So they played with the babies on the floor, 12 sessions, each 25 minutes, at that sensitive period, between 9 and 10 months. Here's what that was like.
Jasper， 早安 Finn， 嗨，我们要来讲一个故事哦。今天要讲的故事是《小熊七七探险记》，来看看发生了什么事情哦。小熊七七在这里，一个绿色的圈圈，绿色的圈圈，绿色的圈圈，再转一下，转一圈，嘿，一圈，再一次哦，转1、2、3。
Okay, how's your Mandarin coming along? So, did the babies learn? And we had to run a control group because just coming into the laboratory for 12 sessions might have improved their listening skills to all languages. So we ran a control group with the American graduate students, same books, same toys, same room, same dosage, and asked, are they getting better at Mandarin? The results said that if they're exposed to English, they do know better at Mandarin than they did before. But look what happened to the babies exposed for 12 sessions to Mandarin. They're statistically equivalent to the babies in Taiwan after that short-term exposure. You give the brain the right stuff at the right time in that social context, and they learn perfectly. So our question was then, can infants learn from a machine? The statistical learning model said that it just is hearing. Just you give infants that input, and they will learn statistically. So we created beautiful DVD videos. The babies were exposed to them in the same pattern. The same material that had been presented live was now filmed and shown on these beautiful DVDs. A brand new group of 32 infants in the same kinds of rooms, everything the same. And the question was, do they learn? The graduate students were predicting that they would learn because the babies crawl up to the videos, they touch the videos, they seem to be very activated by watching the videos. But We had also run an audio-only condition. Here, in this condition, they watched a teddy bear on the screen and they heard the sound. So here's the audio-only condition, no learning whatsoever. Here's the video condition, absolutely no learning whatsoever. Very surprising outcome, because it looked as though these kids might be learning, but the brain and behavioral measures afterwards said absolutely not. They're not learning anything. The social brain is required. The social brain, that social context that was lighting up those kids, that was making them so excited as they waited for their sessions to start, was producing a kind of learning that matched the kids who'd been listening for 11 months in Taiwan. So we've got these very contrasting, perfect learning and absolutely no learning from the screen. So it changed our entire view about what is happening in the early language period, that the social context and this social interaction is playing a huge role, and we wanted to understand what it is. So we turned then to more studies. So why do you use a $2.5 million machine to study the babies? Because it's the only brain imaging equipment that is silent, non-invasive, completely safe. It doesn't make noise, and you can look not only at the temporal signal, not just ERPs that give you precise temporal data, but also get some idea of the sources of that activity. So our first study produced, we had been doing MEG in other parts of the world, but our first one, published with our own machine in 2014, gave us strong evidence of the sensory motor interaction that occurs as babies listen to speech. We showed earlier that not when they listen to non-speech signals, but when they listen to speech, you activate motor systems. You activate Broca's, you activate the cerebellum. Universally in the early period, and then differently at 12 months. So this sensory motor learning is very active in that early period. Andy showed this yesterday, we were the first in the world to put babies in an MEG machine. It is a technical tour de force. It's difficult because the babies are allowed to move, and we need to track their head movements to know where the head is. So we've hired the physicist from the company from Electa Neuromag, who is now directing our MEG center and inventing signal processing techniques that allow us to track the baby's head. And I'm going to turn the volume way down. I've got...
Better half of the babies, such as the one in this video, were from Spanish-English bilingual households.
So we're testing monolingual and bilingual babies. You see what it takes to set up the experiment.
And a special digitizing pen to track the shape of the baby's head. This procedure allows changes in the magnetic field. It precisely pinpoints both.
The baby is put in the machine. Okay, so that's a perfect baby. They're not all perfect. They're not all perfect. But this is a perfect baby. So what can we see? Well, we can see extraordinary activity in Broca's area of the brain. So here we're showing some of our MRI data from a 12-month-old monolingual child. And we're targeting our ROIs, our auditory areas, and Broca's area. Broca's area is involved in many, many tasks, but it certainly is a motor planning area. And we're studying with MRI the strength of the arcuate. The bubbles you see is simulation of the MEG activity in auditory and Broca's as they listen to the standard sound. In this experiment, this standard sound is common to English and Spanish. Then they get an English test sound exclusive to English. You see auditory in red goes way up. And we're watching what's happening in Broca's. Broca's is always active. When we turn on for this 12-month-old, the Spanish sound, what we see is even greater activity in Broca's. Broca's gets very active when the motor pattern required is one that the baby doesn't know. So by the time they're 12 months, babies can imitate quite well as they're beginning to master that sound contrast, but they don't know how to produce a sound from a foreign language. And so when you present a 12-monther with a French vowel or a Spanish consonant that they can't produce, it's like the motor system, both Broca's and the cerebellum, work extra hard. It's activated longer, it's activated more strongly, because we believe that the system, the sensory motor system, is by that time analyzing the sound by synthesizing, by developing a model for what the motor plan would require. And we think this is very interesting from a social perspective. This sensory motor connectivity may not be present in children with autism, who have trouble imitating, both auditory imitation, vocal imitation, and motor imitation. So this sensory motor system may be unique to humans, may be unique to human actions and human vocal production. This is the MEG result at 6 months. It's complicated, but at 6 months, the Broca's and the cerebellum are active for all languages equally. At 12 months, you see this V-shaped pattern identical to adults. For the auditory stimulus, you see an increase in superior temporal to the native by 12 months. But in Broca's, doing something else, you see an increase to the non-native. And that exact V pattern is seen with adults as well. So by 12 months, the brain and its sensory motor system is activated in the way that adults are. So we go back to this question, if this sensory motor system is behaving in the way that it is, and this might depend on social interaction, why don't infants learn from screens? And right from the beginning, we had two hypotheses. One is information is different. Babies watch as the tutors are naming something. The babies watch the eyes of the tutor and the object. And we demonstrated this eye gaze is different depending on how much the babies are learning. Babies look at each other, they're looking at the objects, they're looking at the tutor. We demonstrated in 2015 that the more babies shift their gaze as they watch the tutor, the higher their event-related potential results are showing learning. So this information is partly why babies learn more from live human interaction than they learn from a screen. But there's a new component. We published this on Monday in PNAS, this Monday. The mere presence of a social partner changes a baby's ability to learn, and we look at this with the screen. So the screen is the hardest way to learn. And so we're letting the babies turn on the screen to increase attention, to see what's the role of that. But now we let them learn alone or together. So we have solo learning and learning in pairs. Now here's what that looks like. So here's a baby tested alone, and what happens as she listens to the Mandarin speaker is that she gets a 20-second clip each time she presses the screen, okay? And it's exactly the same when they learn in pairs, except that there are two. And our original hypothesis was that potentially one baby would be teaching the other baby how to do it, that they would be collaborating, that the more one baby paired with another baby, the better they might get. Again, it's lovely to be surprised in science. We've been surprised in science many times. What we show, first of all, we show that this MMN, this secret, signature of phonetic learning is only shown when the babies are in pairs. It's never shown in the kids who are learning individually. So the paired infants are at the top, individual infants are here. This is an effect that's related to exposure, and it's a positivity. So typically in ERPs, positivity is down, negativity is up. So this is what we see in the kids. So, sorry, here's the individual kids. They show the positivity at these two locations. The negativity, which is in this period of time, is shown only, so the blue one shows the subtraction of black and red. Here's our MMN at FZ and at CZ. You only see it in the paired infants. So MMN is only there when the babies are learning together. Now, here's the biggest surprise. Novel partners increase learning. So we had assigned babies, the target babies, we had our 16 babies that were targets, and then their partners in learning. And because of the way sessions are scheduled with babies, some babies had more novel partners than others, whereas other babies had more consistent partners. It was random, just according to the schedule. What the event-related potential data show is that the babies who had more novel partners show a stronger MMN, more negativity. So it's as though novelty in social learning is a catalyst for phonetic learning. Now, I find this fascinating that the novelty, we are so, alert to novelty in social partners, and it plays such a role in pair bonding and everything that Larry said, this idea of what does novelty do to learning. What this suggests is that the reason learning together is important is that it changes our biochemistry, it changes the neurobiology of learning, and that novelty plays a role in enhancing learning. that the babies didn't get better by learning with the same partner over and over again. They got better by having novel partners to learn with. So brand new, showing the motivational side of this social learning story. And we're, of course, turning to what Larry and others have been talking about, the social motivation argument, that there's this reward system that we and the babies, we think, are rewarded by the mother's voice, they're rewarded by the mother's face. This is a study done by Andy and my daughter, Catherine KM Stavropoulos now, that's her married name. She's been looking at the SPN, so the stimulus preceding negativity. It's a sign of the expectancy of reward. And she measured it in 5 to 12-year-old typical children and children with autism. And she uses faces, smiling or frowning, or arrows up and down as the feedback signals in block trials. And what she shows is that in typically developing kids, the face is a big reward. The knowing that you're going to see a face produces this SPN. But in autism, the opposite. It's arrows that produce the SPN. And so it demonstrates that the reward system is working in children with autism, but children with autism are rewarded by something else. Okay, so just as we wrap up, I want to mention a signal. I mentioned in the beginning that we use our voices to modulate emotion. We use our voices to indicate how we feel about another and how we are linking to one another. This parentese signal is quite unique in both conveying a positive social message and doing something to support language. So this, at the top, you see the pitch of adult-directed speech. A mother in the laboratory is sitting with her baby. She's talking to a research assistant, and she says, I had a little bit, and the doctor gave me Bendectin for it. It's sort of flat. As I'm speaking to you, there's modulation, but it's nothing like what happens when she turns to her baby. She says, can you say ah? Say ah. Hey, you. Say hi. I can't get that high. It's too early. But this signal is both warm and attractive to infants. I said they select it. It's also good for language skills because here you see the acoustic representation of those formant frequencies. The blue triangle is when we talk to one another. Women in these 3 countries, America, Russia, and Sweden, we're talking to adults in blue, and in red they turn to their babies. When they turn to their babies and you plot the acoustics of E, ah, and oo, universal across languages, what do? We clean up our act. It's clearer. It's spread out. It's when the baby brain is mapping the sounds of the language and we're producing this parentese, you're stretching the signal and making it easier for babies to do that mapping. It's universal across languages. In studies measuring parentese in one-to-one interaction at home, when you see a parent face-to-face with a child, and that signal glues that baby to that mother, both emotionally and linguistically, the more you see that at 11 months in the home by any adult in the family, the more language measured later is higher. And standard speech has no effect, basically. But this parentese speech is very good. Okay, as I wrap up, we're very interested in this face-to-face interaction, and we're doing experiments in which we are hyperscanning. So these studies put mom in an ERP cap and baby in the MEG, and this is the study, this is the pilot work, and I want to show you what happens when we contrast face-to-face interaction with the mother turning to work on something like this. A cell phone. Okay, here's what happens. Oh, please work. Oh. It's not going to work. Okay. Wait a second. Let me see if I can get it. So sorry. They were working earlier. Let's see if this does it.
Did you?
Just switch it. Now, for the first time, we can actually visualize functional activity with the MEG machine. Off the baby brain is coming a literal tsunami of data.
Do it again?
We can create a movie of the brain reacting as parents talk to their baby.
Oh, he got the bunny.
What really makes us human is the fact that we are social creatures.
Oh, there's more bubbles.
We're proving that babies need social stimulation to learn. The social brain is the gate for learning.
Down.
When Francesca's in front of Lamarcus and she's talking,
And the ball clap together?
the motor systems that will eventually be able to talk are activated.
Pia, pia, piano, 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 pia, pia, piano.
But then we have her do something asocial. She looks down at her cell phone. She's not talking anymore. The brain turns off. No auditory signal, no social. Okay, so in the end, we had to change how we did the experiment. We could not use the cell phone because the babies were so upset. We had to have the mother turn away and talk to someone else, so at least there's some language going on. But the brain reacts very, very rapidly to this removal of the social stimulus. And when it's a machine, when it's just the mother completely ignoring the bids of attention that the baby is desperately producing, the babies fall apart. And so we're now doing the study with the mother talking to the baby and turning away and talking to someone else, which is just a little bit less awful for the baby. Anyway, I'll just wrap up. We're doing some other hyperscanning in Japan with 2 MEGs next to each other, but it's still very, very preliminary. We're fascinated by all aspects of this early period and social stimulation. So I'm just going to close it there and say there are tons of collaborators and tons of supporters helping to do this work on early language acquisition. The role of social cannot be underestimated. I think it will underpin all of human learning in a way that we've not understood before. Language is kind of a canonical case because it was thought to be so separate, not connected with cognition, not connected with social. We're turning that theory completely on its head. Thanks very much for your attention.
For the lovely talk. Any questions?
Yeah, you can start to say.
Hi. So great talk. Thanks a lot. I have a question that you kind of answered, I think, in the middle, which is always upsetting. I thought I have a great criticism and then you answer it. So the first studies, it seems that you used audio and video, which is passive observation.
Right.
And that is not really proof that they don't learn, because one of the mechanisms for learning is probably by the interaction and the reinforcement. And by that, I don't mean reinforcement that can be verbal, like good or not, but just by playing in the space and seeing how the other interacts with you.
Right.
And so my question is, how much is, when you say social, how much do you know it's social per se, or simply someone giving you, and that would happen in machine learning.
Great question.
Statistical learning, by definition, is not just observing statistics. You need a learning rule, some kind of reinforcement learning that tells you that you know how to travel in the distance.
Yeah,
and
right.
Maybe that's what babies do.
Okay, so
learning, or
so what we were trying to do in the beginning is set up very contrastive situations. So totally natural learning of language in a social setting, and then the TV, which gives them absolutely nothing. No eye contact, no circuit TV that allow them to actually see the babies. So we wanted to contrast those two. Now we've got other studies going. The screen and the touching and the social manipulation there is an attempt, because we thought one of the first things that separates social from non-social is contingent interaction. So just touching the TV would at least produce something immediately. But now we have studies going on with this short circuit TV so that the babies can they can see, and there's interactivity, and you can see that improves learning. And we're also looking at what happens, almost like a Skype test, where the baby interacts for 5 minutes ahead of time with that tutor, and then sees them on the short circuit television. And each of these can inch it up, and we're using the brain MMN as the sort of neural metric of how much each of these is playing a component. So many people have thought of clever ideas. The neurobiologists always want you to test smell, just the presence of that human being. I think there are many features that separate true social interaction from this very flat screen TV. But so again, the idea of statistical learning being this, in babies, this implicit mechanism that happens regardless of your attention and automatically. We were trying to test that version. And we can say the baby brain is not an automaton. The baby brain is not affected, at least in natural language learning. Some of the studies are using simple 8 syllables. They can learn then, but not natural language learning. So we're trying to be very careful, but it's a great question.
We'll take only one question. Is there any?
Beautiful talk.
Thank you.
I was wondering, what role do you ascribe actually to the premotor activity during the learning?
Yeah.
Because you, of course, have generated data as well to show that the other animals like chinchillas can learn these distinctions probably without recruiting the motor system.
Right.
And now you really show beautiful data that demonstrates how much the motor system is
playing a role. Exactly. So ages ago, 1975, I demonstrated that this break, this ability to hear the differences very sensitively right at the boundary exists in other mammals. It exists in monkeys, it exists in chinchillas. But it's different from this learning that takes place, this change. So chinchillas do what babies do at birth, meaning they show a peak in sensitivity right at the boundary. Again, it overturns the view, Chomsky's view, that language was invented de novo. And it says instead that we capitalized on existing systems, audition, and the way that it works under complex listening situations. Animal calls can often be separated on the same cues that some phonetic contrasts are separated by. So we capitalized in inventing the sound system for language on complex auditory function. So that's what animals show. Babies are doing something else. They begin at that point, able to hear all these distinctions, but then a very powerful set of learning mechanisms take over. That kind of powerful learning, I don't think, for language exists in animals. So that's the break, this powerful learning. And this learning is of these different types. Implicit statistical derivations from listening, but in this social context. And so what is that? What is that social? And I think that social piece involves this sensory motor connection, this recognition of self and other as being the same, and this tendency for a sensory stimulus to be responded to by a motor pattern, to work in the world, to imitate, to learn all the things that Andy's talking about. To learn a language, you have to be able to not only hear that language, but produce that language. And so these sensory motor networks are operating right from the beginning. They seem to be unique to speech. And so I'm saying that the baby early in development is cooing and working out a schema for how this works. And when they're listening at 7 months, they're not sensitized to the native language yet, but by 11 months, when they're babbling in a unique way to the language, they listen, they use their motor plans to simulate, to synthesize, and that activity of the sensory motor loop accounts for the narrowing that occurs in speech production. So they start out producing everything the same across languages, then narrow, just like perception. So I think that's the piece that's unique to humans. And we have to keep going to test that hypothesis. Thanks for that important question.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that talk.